Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for September's special edition of Health Bytes with Region 3. We are pleased to welcome this month's speakers, Margaret Foster, Kyle Holland, Dani LaPreze, and Esmeralda Rodgers. Margaret Foster is the Evidence Synthesis and Scholarly Dissemination Librarian and the head of the Center for Systematic Reviews and Research Synthesis at the Medical Sciences Library, Texas A&M University. She is the co-author of Piecing Together Systematic Reviews and Other Evidence Synthesis. She received the Lucretia W. McClure Excellence in Education Award in 2024 from the Medical Library Association. Kyle Holland is an information specialist with the Center for Systematic Reviews and Research Synthesis at Texas A&M University Medical Sciences Library. He specializes in systematic searching and bibliographic data manipulation. Dani LaPreze is an evidence review and synthesis librarian. She leads and collaborates with interdisciplinary research teams at the Texas A&M University Medical Sciences Library, specializing in advanced literature searching and strategic support for evidence synthesis initiatives. Her role emphasizes hands-on research expertise and effective team coordination throughout the review process. And finally, Esmeralda Rodgers serves as an evidence review and synthesis librarian at the Texas A&M University Medical Sciences Library as well. Her work focuses on expert literature searching and providing comprehensive guidance to researchers conducting evidence synthesis projects. In today's Health Bytes, a fireside chat with Margaret Foster and the team at Texas A&M. Margaret and the team will discuss emerging standards and best practices for integrating artificial intelligence into systematic reviews. The remainder of the time will be devoted to answering your questions about systematic reviews. So please feel free to use the Q&A, as Bailey mentioned, to submit questions if you did not have a chance to do so in advance. So thank you all for being our guest speakers this morning, and I'm now going to turn everything over to you.
So good morning. Thank you for joining us. We can go ahead and go to the next slide here and probably speed past that one as we've gotten our introduction in. Our objectives today this is kind of a follow-up of the webinar that we did on AI back in April. So some of the things I'm just going to kind of refer back to that webinar, and then this is going to be an update on some of those standards. And then each of my team is going to talk about a different aspect of how we are using AI in our work. And while we're doing this, feel free to add some questions in as we go along. And then I'm going to answer some of the questions that were submitted before the webinar, and then we'll see what you have at the end. So last time I focused a lot in talking about the standards on some different policies that had come out, such as from PRISMA. Mostly the PRISMA guidelines had focused on systematic reviews of AI interventions. They are starting to move into other aspects of AI reporting and things like that. I also talked about what the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors had to say. And then I had mentioned RAISE. And this time I would like to talk a little bit more about RAISE as they have moved a little bit further along in their planning. And so that's what I'm going to be focusing on. And I also want to mention some organizations to watch out for as we're seeing things change rapidly. So RAISE stands for Responsible AI and Evidence Synthesis. There are many people working on this, and you may recognize Jay Thomas as he's over at the Epicenter in the UK. This is a quick overview of this picture is of the different roles and their different expectations around AI. And so that's from RAISE 1. And then RAISE 2 is about building and evaluating AI tools. And then the last one is about selecting and using. So I'm going to talk a little bit about RAISE 1 and zoom in on evidence synthesis, and then I'm going to talk about RAISE 3, which is selecting and using AI. Next slide. And so in RAISE 1, where it's talking about evidence synthesis, that's where it's going to relate the most to what we do. And so they highlight these three areas, which I don't think it's surprising that those review authors, they're going to remain responsible for whatever the AI that they're incorporating. It's still their responsibility for that to be correct. To report their use of AI and be transparent about that, and then to, of course, ensure that this is all done ethically and all of that and meets all the standards. So if you go to the next slide, I want to highlight these organizations to watch here, and then we'll get into how to integrate it into your work. So the Evidence Synthesis Infrastructure Collaborative, that has gotten started sometime in the last year. I can't exactly remember when it started, but it has multiple group members from Cochrane, JBI, Campbell, and what they did is these leaders got together and said, hey, we don't want to be stepping on each other's toes or, reinventing the wheel. What if we're doing this more together? And so one of their working groups, Working Group 3, is focusing on safe and responsible use of AI. And they've had several meetings where they invited people in to hear about what they're doing and to give feedback. And so if you look at the link of the list of resources that we provided for the Fireside chat, you can see more about that. These other two groups, one is the ICASR. It's a group that started back a decade ago, and they are looking towards finding all those innovations around automation in systematic reviews and providing a forum to share that. And then lastly, this is a newer group, the Destiny group, that we heard about when we were watching some of the Cochrane reviews webinars on AI. And this is a group that is trying to create more tools around AI that can be really helpful. And their specific area is they're looking at climate and health. So you see a lot of environmental questions in here. And one of their big issues is when they get outside of health-related topics and they're not searching Medline and things like that, some of those wonderful thesaurus terms and things that we have kind of goes away. And so you see a lot from this group trying to figure out how to sort faster. So that's going to be one to watch and see what they come up with. Next slide. So in this next set, I'm going to go over what we see in RAISE 3 and about integrating AI into our processes. So on this next slide, I've listed out the steps to make it hopefully a little easier to follow this. And this is how you could either do this as research and in collaboration with a review that's going on, or you could just, instead of maybe you're publishing that research, just trying to make sure, is this going to work? And so thinking about how are we going to do this? What measures are we going to do? And things like that. So on the next slide, their first goal is to figure out, well, what is our goal? Which of the steps are we going to use AI in? And so we know there's lots of different processes that we do in reviews. Many times you'll see people trying to use AI either for sorting or data extraction, but there's other steps and other processes that we could talk about it. And then there is AI that's things like the LLMs, ChatGPT and things like that, versus more of the automated tools that we see, such as in Covidence and other software, where it's kind of a helper in the sorting process. So we see some differences in that I'll talk about towards the end of this. Next slide. So you also want to think about, how do we want to do this? Is this something you're trying to just figure out, could we integrate this AI tool into a process we're doing right now? Or is this a study that you want to work on with it while doing the review. And this is becoming more popular, called a SWAR, where you'll see it could be a separate article, it could be published within the review and show their work and how they were trying to study a certain AI tool. Perhaps you want to be more retrospective and use a previously completed review and then see, oh, if we had used this tool, how well would that have worked? Or you could do it prospectively to see, okay, during this review, let's see how this works. And then if you were doing maybe one of those retrospective ones, you could even test it across multiple different reviews, and then you could see the differences in there as well. Next slide. So one of the hardest parts, of course, is going to be in selecting your tool. And RAISE 3 offers 3 things to think about when selecting the tool. And the first thing is this going to be beneficial, and does it align with your values? And so they listed these 3 values of evidence synthesis: rigor, transparency, and replicability. Boy, that's a big word to say. So making sure that is this going to be reliable, and can we trust it, right? So we all know about the hallucinations and things like that. The next part is, has that tool been validated for AI? And we know that several of these have not. We're still in the very disruptive phase of everything. So you may not know that, and that's why it's important to take more care and doing a lot of piloting here in the beginning. And then, does your team have time to do this, right? We're asking them to not only do that review, but then to take the time and learn a new tool, and then the expertise to know, um, is it getting this correct? So in thinking about how would you evaluate the tool, this has been something that's been noted in many of the papers and talking about evaluating AI for systematic reviews, and that there's no set way of doing this quite yet. So we could think about it, the reliability, precision, things like that. So when we said yes, did AI say yes? That kind of a thing. We can also think about it as in savings. And some people have said, well, maybe it's not fair to compare it to a human. And some people are like, well, that's like the best thing about this, is that it's saving us time. So you can see lots of different ways. And of course, we can't forget the societal impact of AI, such as like the data centers are taking a lot of power, even water and things like that. So there's a lot in all of this to think about. And of course, we've got the typical software characteristics: how usable, how much time did it take to learn. So my last slide in talking, I think I have one more after this. So next one is in the validation issues. So we know that the outcomes haven't been well defined. We haven't really kind of figured out how are we going to compare these different things. Esmeralda is going to be talking about prompt engineering in her section. So we see a lot of variability in that. There's lots of different formats. There's lots of different options out there. And then what I tried to do here is something that we learned about as we were diving deeper into the AI tools, is there's a really big difference between using those machine learning tools such as Covidence and Rayon, where after a while of sorting and saying yes or no to things, then it's starting to say, oh, probably you're going to say yes to this, or probably going to say no to that. There's a really big difference in that system versus the LLMs. So we see that in machine learning, that's reproducible. We can validate that algorithm, and then what training data was used, versus the LLM when it's not transparent. You could get a different answer even using the same prompt. So there's a big difference between those two types of tools, and it's important to keep that in mind when you're thinking about this. So many teams that I'm working with are more interested in testing some machine learning tools than they are in LLMs for certain things right now. They feel like it's more trustworthy, and of course the research is showing that. So we got 2 more steps in here. And so this next step is thinking about, okay, now that you've thought about, okay, we want this tool, this is how we might think about measuring, is starting a pilot. And so if you're not really trying to do research, you just want to figure out, hey, can we use this? This is where you're thinking about what's that measure going to be, and keeping that human in the loop so that if things start going awry quickly, you can quickly stop using it or something like that. And deciding, is it worth it? Should we go on? So it's important to just how we convince our teams, hey, you have to have a protocol first. Let's pilot everything. We're doing that here as well, of course. And then the last step is that monitor stage. So we're piloting, we're keeping the human in the loop, and now we're figuring out what are those quality checks. And of course, the most important thing that we've seen is you want to be very clear to your audience how you use this. And something that Ray's is asking is, let's give feedback to the AI creators so that they know what's working and not working in just, all the wonderful scholarly communication things. So I'm going to turn it over to Esmeralda now, and she's going to talk about prompt engineering.
Hello, everyone. So let's take a deep breath and transition to something a bit simpler. I'm going to present the basics of prompt engineering, give you some examples as they pertain to systematic reviews, and tell you about my experience with creating an AI agent. And yes, I will explain what that is. So let's start with some baseline definitions. When I use the term LLM, I'm talking about ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, and all the others. This is my attempt to remain AI platform agnostic. A prompt is simply the question or instruction you put into the LLM. The answer you get back, we call the output. Now, the quality of that output is directly influenced by how you ask the question, and this is where prompt engineering comes into play. It's the art of carefully and intentionally crafting your prompt in a way that generates an optimal output. Librarians who work on systematic reviews should be familiar with frameworks for research questions. We know that a specific, well-defined question provides a strong foundation for a review. Well, it's very similar with LLM prompts. A well-structured prompt provides better outputs. And just like our well-known PICO framework for reviews, prompt engineering has many different question generation frameworks. Now, let me start by saying I'm not suggesting that every single prompt you enter into an LLM should be structured to this extent, but when asking more complex questions, the structure will definitely help. Let's start with Leo Lowe's CLEAR framework. The first three components, concise, logical, and explicit, those pertain to the actual question generation. The last two, adaptive and reflective, those are more about reviewing your outputs, changing it up if needed, and reflecting on what was successful or not, so that you can improve your practice for the future. Concise just means use clear, simple language and relevant information. So leave out any unnecessary details. And this might disturb some of you, but the pleases and thank yous are definitely considered unnecessary. Logical, that just means the prompt itself, the order that you put things in should have a logical flow of ideas. Explicit is a very large bucket. It captures the specifications you want for your output, and there's a lot to think about here. Examples are, should the LLM stick to information from a source you provided? What role or voice should it use? What format or length do you want? You can specify all kinds of things, a table, bulleted list, 30-word paragraph. The options seem limitless at this point. Adaptive is where you look at your response, and if it's not quite right, try a different approach. This is where we are talking about experimentation until you get what you need. And reflective happens after the fact. It involves critical evaluation of the output and evolving your future approaches to prompting based on how it went. The CAST model Criteria covers the rules or parameters for your desired output, very similar to Lowe's explicit. Audience is simply who the output should be tailored to. For example, I have a coworker who tells ChatGPT to explain complicated medical concepts to her like she's a high school student. And that's actually something I have also adopted. Specifications is where you include more details or descriptions. It can even be specific examples the LLM should emulate. And testing is going to be similar to Lowe's adaptive reflective areas. Core is a much simpler framework that I actually found in the LinkedIn article. I thought it could be easily adapted and very useful for librarians in this context, but also for designing presentations or training materials. It stands for Context, Objective, Role, Example, and you'll see it in action shortly. So here's an example of an unstructured prompt that I put into Copilot. It says, please give me search terms for a paper on stress management in healthcare. Looking at the output, it has picked groupings by focus area for us. We've got general search terms, psychological, behavioral, organizational, and evidence-based. The terms themselves are long phrases in quotes. We get stuff like stress management strategies in healthcare professionals and workplace wellness programs in healthcare. Now, these are not very searchable keywords, but again, we didn't give it a lot of instructions. The LLM also offers to help narrow your topic and find articles, which is a nice touch. Here's another version of that question using the core framework. Our prompt starts with the context and role. I'm a public health graduate student conducting a systematic review on the effectiveness of mindfulness interventions for reducing stress in healthcare workers. Then we jump into the objective, which is generate a list of keywords I can use in a library database search. Finally, we give it maybe not exactly an example, but we give it some structure in the last bit, which says organize keywords by population, intervention, and outcome. Looking at the output, the categories are exactly what we wanted, population, intervention, and outcome. We get much more searchable keyword terms for population. We get things like healthcare workers, nurses, physicians, hospital employees, etc. For intervention, we get mindfulness, MBSR, mindfulness practices, and outcomes are going to be things like stress, burnout, mental well-being. So much more searchable compared to those long phrases in the previous prompt. And instead of trying to get us to narrow things down at the end, it suggests combinations using Boolean operators and gives us an example search string. It also offers to help us develop inclusion-exclusion criteria, likely because it has some context. It knows we're doing a systematic review because we told it. So in our last example, we're using the CLEAR framework. We're aiming for concise, logical, and explicit. I was able to reduce the prompt to 29 words from our previous 42. I also asked it to organize my keywords into a table just so that you can see what the difference is, as you give it different formatting instructions. As a side note, if you're using Gemini and if you tell it to make an Excel sheet for you, it's going to say, no, I can't do that. I'm Google. So say table, not Excel. Like you have to be kind of specific with your wording. Okay, so my new prompt is generate search keywords for a systematic review about mindfulness interventions for stress reduction in healthcare workers. Organized into a table with 3 distinct columns: population, intervention, and outcome. The output shows the keywords we get are very close to, if not exactly the same as the previous prompts, but they're in a table, as you can see, which I prefer very much. It doesn't go into as much detail with offering Boolean combinations. It just says you can mix and match terms using Boolean operators in your database searches. But it does ask if you'd like building or adapting database search strings. I feel like this one didn't offer quite as much as the core framework, probably because we were so concise with the instruction. My theory is that the output mimicked the input in its brevity. Okay, so I'm going to transition into my experience creating a custom LLM. Custom LLM uses a pre-existing model. You tailor it for a specific task and train it with sources specific to your subject area. It can use the open web in addition to your sources. A common example, maybe not the best, but one we've all used are those customer service chatbots. I use Microsoft Copilot Studio, but have listed other platforms for you. So the Google version is Google AI Studio and OpenAI's ChatGPT Builder. As a team, we had been brainstorming about AI agents in general, but it was actually Margaret's idea to create one in the context of question frameworks. Review questions should be structured using different frameworks like PICO, PEO, and PCC. There are a lot of them, but they all have clear-cut definitions and best use cases, and this provides a solid foundation for an AI agent. Our AI agent was named Research Question Builder, and its purpose is to help researchers formulate well-structured questions for evidence synthesis projects by providing frameworks, defining components, and generating structured questions from user input. I've vetted a variety of knowledge sources. This is the library that it uses to generate responses. So this included our systematic review LibGuide, slides from Margaret's Pieces workshop that discussed question frameworks, and 3 open access articles like Booth's Topology of Reviews, like articles that have like definitions and examples. I also used a large Word document that I created, which defined the problem statement, purpose, goals, and tone. I gave it specific restrictions, especially telling it to only pull from my knowledge base and sticking to question generation. I have bolded restrictions because it tried to do all kinds of things that we didn't want it to do before we kind of reined it in. The biggest component of that document was probably all the definitions of different review types and their corresponding question frameworks. Initially, this was built in Microsoft 365 Copilot, but I discovered that it could only be used by others with a premium subscription. So I built it in Copilot Studio, which allowed me to publish it to the open web. And all of this required no coding, by the way. So here is a screenshot of our custom agent. It's roughly 30 days old. The reviews team and the larger research and education team tested it, and it actually does a pretty good job. It was able to take general research topics and produce well-structured questions after some dialogue about preferred review types. I also asked it to convert a PICO question into a PCC question, which it was able to do well. Unfortunately, this is not published for public use at this point, because digging through the analytics, we figured out that there was going to be a cost associated with every transaction. I was on a free version when I built it, so go figure. I considered trying another platform, but I'd have to pay for whatever the premium subscription is of that. And there's also some privacy matters that you have to think about. I know that I can feed it open access information, but it will very likely take user data for training purposes. And I'm sure my institution has some guidelines about that we would need to look into. So there's a lot to think about, and I'm not exactly sure where we'll go from here, but it was definitely a fun learning experience. Okay, so to summarize, understanding the fundamentals of prompt engineering and using frameworks like Clear, Core, and Cast for more complex questions can significantly improve your AI responses. Custom LLMs are trained in specific domain areas and offer specialized expertise. Our agent was trained to help researchers develop well-structured research questions, and I'm sure there are many potential applications. However, you should proceed with careful consideration of potential costs, your institutional policies, and data privacy. You will find my references and some informational websites in the resources document that's going to be made available to you at the end of this whole thing. I will now punt to Kyle Holland.
Thank you, Esmeralda. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Kyle, and I'm going to be giving you an overview and some tips on how AI can help you in systematic literature searching. Now, an in-depth overview of systematic searching itself is beyond the scope of this presentation, but I'd like to briefly define systematic searching for the purposes of my discussion today. So systematic searching is for any given research question. I'm going to read these verbatim. Selecting a set of relevant searchable resources, usually databases and some grey-lit sources, identifying searchable concepts within your research question, which is typically mediated by its attendant eligibility criteria, and finally, composing a set of queries to retrieve all relevant literature by targeting those concepts. And this is it's a vast oversimplification of a highly involved workflow that entails term collection and reckoning with seed studies, troubleshooting, and plenty more besides, but this comprises the primary searching part of a review. And in this section of the presentation, I won't be discussing subsequent tasks like reference exporting or forward and backward citation searching due to the currently limited applications of AI for those tasks. Speaking of limitations, there is plenty that AI is not presently equipped to accomplish in the systematic search process. Namely, it cannot automate the most labor-intensive parts of searching. And just to clarify, when I say AI from here on, I'm using those as a shorthand for generative large language models like ChatGPT. So to summarize, it has been pretty rigorously demonstrated that AI cannot outsearch you as an information professional. AI cannot reliably generate searches that don't require you to go over them with a fine-tooth comb in most cases. AI cannot be trusted as your only source of peer review for searches, and AI isn't a reliable way to fortify your searches with non-English terms. A lot of that information is explored more in depth during Cochrane's stellar series of webinars. In the time since those presentations, I've done some forward citation searching on their key references, and I'm unsurprised to report that there haven't been any major developments since. So I think actually Cochrane, Margaret was showing me, published a study like last week where they examined Copilot with some expert prompting methods to generate some systematic searches, and the authors did not deem it adequate at the time. So this all begs the question, what can AI do for systematic searching? My professional opinion, and this is something that I've chosen to phrase rather carefully, is that it can be used as a supplemental source of input and insight. You've likely heard that LLMs excel at generalization. They can very quickly draw on deep bases of textual data and web pages, and we can work with that as systematic searchers. So I'm going to go over some ways that you can leverage LLMs in order to inform or refine your searches rather than outright generating them. I'll note that I've either seen these methods tested myself or I've taken a crack at them. And I wanted to touch on briefly, I saw Jules mentioned in the chat, but the good people at Cochrane, and so do I, anticipate that the greatest potential AI has for actually generating searches will probably be realized whenever LLMs are integrated into large database interfaces like Ovid, like EBSCO, but these aren't ubiquitous yet. Not everyone has access to them. And much of what I say here will still apply to those anyway. So first, I found that researchers often begin without references that exemplify the question they're investigating, or they simply have very few seed studies to begin with. But with even relatively simple prompting, LLMs can locate a handful of studies that investigators would at least consider including as per their current eligibility criteria. If your researchers already have a study or two, you can ask for similar studies from an LLM, and this is just a way to expedite the formation of actionably specific eligibility criteria by putting researchers in conversation with any literature whatsoever to start with. It allows to inform the composition of your search strategies as any studies will, seed studies. And it will provide some extra evidence for where to apply searches, which you can glean from the databases where the seed studies journals are indexed. And because you, by submitting it to an LLM, aren't searching within a database to begin with, it's possible that this manner of searching can expand the databases that you'll eventually search for the full production of the review that you hadn't initially considered. And you can apply the same method to a quick scoping search of related reviews on the topic that you're investigating, which is especially beneficial if you're starting with a broad research question. I also wanted to quickly note that LLMs have this propensity to be very conversational and to unsolicited offer their evaluation on the availability of evidence or information on a topic. Just know that no LLM today is trained on humanity's entire corpus of academic literature. If it says that evidence is limited or proposes some alteration to your research question in light of a conclusion it makes like that, just consider that feedback skeptically. Another way that AI can augment the search process is by aiding in the identification of searchable concepts. One approach to this is by extracting linguistically present concepts or themes from seed studies, and to consider that information in light of a work in progress question. Submitting seed studies as PDFs to a customizable LLM like Esmeralda mentioned, like Google's Notebook LM, offers a focused way to perform that kind of analysis. And of course, you can always throw a research question into an LLM and ask it to identify searchable concepts itself, either directly by asking that or by asking it to compose its own search and looking for the concepts that it identified. You can even say map your question to a Pico framework or whatever framework you're using, and this will just gives you some more insight into how or where to start composing. And I personally have found this method or this sphere to be most useful to get a second opinion on challengingly vague or an unsearchable set of eligibility criteria, like if half your eligibility criteria is United States populations only. One, your question probably needs to be refined. And two, that's something you probably want to avoid including in the search if you can. An AI can just offer you some different angles to the search if you don't see a good solution at the outset. Next, I would say that AI probably has the most consistent potential in helping with term collection, and that's not just limited to synonyms. AI is a great, quick way to probe the variations on a term or set of terms, or terms which invoke equivalent concepts in the context of your search. There are numerous examples I could list of how very relevant words or a combination of words can easily slip the mind of even the most seasoned searcher. A search on the topic of death will inevitably need to include some mention of life, probably. Same goes for sickness, health, depending on the search. Parts of speech like gerunds have a funny way of changing spellings earlier in a word. If you're searching for milk, you can't simply truncate the word milk to get the compound word breast milk, and the list goes on. These are the kind of things that an LLM can alert you to, just through some simple exchanges. And moreover, if you're looking to collect terms from a subject heading interface within a database, you're probably going to need a list of terms to submit to that heading search function. And these heading search functions are notorious for not supporting wildcards and not mapping your term to other grammatical forms of that term. So I'm going to use the word milk as an example again. When searching for subject headings in CAB abstracts, for example, which I don't recommend doing, you would have no way of knowing that milk and milks, plural, are two separate headings which are not contained within the same hierarchy and are not both immediately displayed when you search for either milk or milks. LLMs can help you quickly generate all grammatical forms of the word milk, which would enable you to overcome this bizarre barrier of needing to search the plural term, or I guess it could also be the third person present form of the word, to submit that to a search heading interface. Also, if you're conducting a search on a niche or highly technical topic, LLMs can help you quickly isolate websites which collate the vernacular specific to that topic, which I personally found to be very useful when working with clients who just sort of assume that we're also experts in their field and know all of the jargon. My next slide. So as I mentioned previously, on their own, LLMs are not a replacement for human peer review of your searches. LLMs can, however, offer their opinion of searches, which can reveal new approaches that you hadn't considered, reveal missing terms that I just discussed. And with some clever prompting, you might even be able to get it to give you some press grade feedback on certain aspects of your search by leveraging a custom LLM and throwing the press guidelines in as like a PDF. You could potentially say, use their checklist in there as criteria for evaluating my search and give me some feedback on it. Another novel approach is to directly pit your search against an AI-generated one by perhaps submitting your question, asking it to generate a search, and then either within that same LLM or in a different LLM, comparing the strengths and weaknesses of your search versus the AI generated one and having it evaluate that. And this is just another method to facilitate some outside the box thinking and acquire insight to support a comprehensive search strategy. And to close my section of the presentation, I'd like to touch on what I call AI-based search constructors. I'm not talking about tools like Elicit that can directly apply like a string of natural language to, say, the Semantic Scholar API, all without generating a reproducible query. I'm talking about these tools where you enter your research question or your PICO or your eligibility criteria, or a few keywords or some combination of all that, and it auto-magically composes a syntactically functional query with expanded terms and operators and fields and everything. And the syntax for these usually turns out to be pretty basic. They typically are limited to databases like PubMed with open access APIs, and they usually try to impose kind of an arbitrary framework in the form of Pico or some other search framework. And there are many of these now, and they keep popping up, and I have a lot to say about them if anyone's interested. But just to name a few that I looked at while I was putting together this presentation, there's one called 2D Search. Nested Knowledge has one in their suite of review tools. There's something called KG AI, another tool called Spectrum SRA, which is not associated with the Systematic Review Accelerator. And a while back, Unbound Medicine, it was like a year ago actually, gave us a demo of a project that they had in the works that also accomplishes this. Oh, and the University of Queensland has their, I think it's called Information Engineering Lab, which is constantly trying to develop tools in this vein. So I just want to say these tools are great for preliminary or scoping searches, but I wouldn't trust them to convert even a very detailed set of inputs into a comprehensive search query, or at least one that you wouldn't have to review. I should also note that there isn't a lot of research specifically done on these constructors yet because they're so new. And this last part is so that's my personal opinion about them, but I can say more later if anyone's interested. And with that, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Dani to talk about project management.
There we go. Hi, I'm Dani. So I'm going to be talking about project management, a little shift from the technical part of AI and more into the little bit more of like a application, I guess. So project management and evidence synthesis, we're going to talk about specifically how structured approaches and tools can make systematic and other types of reviews smoother, more efficient, and more collaborative. So let's start with the big picture. Evidence synthesis is a process with many, many moving parts, from pilot and protocol development to search design, production, and finally paper submission. Each phase involves many people, tasks that need to be completed, and lots of communication back and forth. Without strong project management, things can easily become chaotic. So some of the challenges that we see are keeping communication clear and team members accountable, avoiding duplication of effort, and making sure that timelines, roles, and outputs stay aligned. Without project management, it is easy to lose track of who's responsible for what, who's working on what, or end up with 5 versions of the same document kind of floating around. So why does project management matter? It gives us structure. It allows us to improve collaboration and accountability, reduce inefficiencies and duplication of effort, and ensure that reviews meet those quality standards that we're all trying to match, and keep us on schedule. So ultimately, project management is what turns these complex processes into, it turns complex processes that can get real messy real fast into a really manageable workflow. So there's 2 platforms that we're going to look at today, which I'm sure most of us are familiar with. So we've got Microsoft Teams and then Google Workspace. There are others out there, of course, and what you choose depends on your institutional requirements or restrictions, costs, and many other variables. These 2 seem to be pretty industry consistent. So these are the 2 that we're going to look at today. So if we take a look at Microsoft Teams, it integrates communication, file storage, task planning all in one space. So what I like to do is I create a team for each research group that I'm working with. And depending on how granular you want to get, you can add channels within those teams for different phases or sub-teams. The file storage is all done through SharePoint, which offers version control, collaborative working, and they have features built into Teams such as Planner that you can use to assign tasks and look at deadlines. So the pros of this platform are the strong integration of different tools, version control, as well as real-time collaboration. And then the cons, it does require a license, and for some groups, the learning curve can be a little bit steeper. So this is an example of how a review team might be structured in Teams. If you want, like I said, if you want to go to a granular level, you can add different channels for the stages of the review, like the protocol development, your search strategies, writing and submission, or you can set up channels to organize team members for different communication needs. I think on this one, I have like team leadership. So that's a locked channel. So only people that are in that leadership, if there's, for whatever reason, private communication that needs to happen, it's still kept within the team hub, but it's not available to everybody. So generally, I like to keep everything in one main channel, but that is me. The ability to customize projects and organize each group to what fits you and that group, I find really helpful. So we also have an example of the Files tab where any relevant files could be stored, accessed for everyone involved. So this is a standard file list of what I would add for each project. So we have a place to keep our meeting notes, a section for everything protocol related, any searching development that happens, and so on. All right, another option that Teams offers is built-in task planning and timelines. Again, depending on how granular you want to go with your organization or how much you or your team need, you can set up a timeline and deliverable tasks with each team to help either keep people on track or provide an overview of what's been done and what's coming up, what the next steps are. This can be really helpful for new teams that might not be as familiar with the review process or how the whole project is supposed to work. So part of the AI integration with Teams is Copilot. It's built directly into the Microsoft ecosystem. So it's already in there with Word, Excel, Teams, and Outlook, which means it meets us right where we are already working. For evidence synthesis, Copilot can draft or refine sections of protocol and reports, summarize long email chains or meeting notes so teams don't miss important details. The summarizing and listing out of action items from meetings is actually one of my favorite features of this AI integration. Copilot can also help with version management by comparing document changes across different drafts, and even suggest timelines or task breakdowns inside Planner or Teams based on project goals. Because it's embedded in the Microsoft suite, Copilot works best when your team is already using Teams and SharePoint as your project hub. However, people from outside your organization can be invited into a team. It does help reduce repetitive work and keeps communication all aligned within that specific group project. So the next one we're going to look at is Google Workspace. So Google Workspace offers centralized storage in Google Docs, real-time collaboration in Docs and Sheets, and communication through Google Chat and Meet. So the pros for this hub or for this platform are it is accessible, it's low cost, and it's fairly intuitive to use. The cons are that project tracking is less robust and the tools aren't as tightly integrated as they are with Teams. So an example project organization is shown here. So the file organization is very similar to that in Teams. The main difference is the centralization of communication. So Google Workspace is great for teams that really just need a space to kind of house and work on documents collectively or collaboratively and make sure that everything that they're using is in one spot. The biggest difference between Teams and Workspace does come down to the integration of those tools and services. Yes, Google does have apps like Google Meet, Google Calendar, and others, but they are tools that need to be accessed and set up separately for each group. It's not like Teams where you hit chat or you hit Meet and it's all within that one team. So if you look at the AI integration for Google, this is obviously Gemini. And Gemini supports evidence synthesis project management by enforcing consistent naming conventions and file folder organization in Drive so that everything's easier to locate. Offers pre-designed templates for protocols, reports, or spreadsheets that help standardize outputs across the team. Supports clear communication, for example, generating quick summaries of collaborative effort or collaborative edits in Google Docs or chat, as well as creating project-specific training resources or quick guides that can be shared with team members on demand. So wrapping up on Gemini, it works especially well in environments that value this real-time collaboration, and it offers a flexible workspace that the Google model is kind of traditionally known for. And I just have this one last slide for myself. Go. So best practices, regardless of what platform you use or how you choose to organize your research teams, project management isn't just a nice to have option anymore in evidence synthesis. It's becoming essential. So best practices for project management are being consistent, utilizing templates when available, whether they're pre-designed or made by you. I've made quite a few templates that I use for my teams. Using project-specific resources, and then being clear in communication with your team members. So by choosing the right platform, applying best practices, and leveraging AI, we can reduce inefficiencies, improve collaboration, and ultimately deliver higher quality reviews. And with that, I'm going to kick it back over to Margaret. And Margaret, I'll control your slides, and you'll be good to go.
Okay, thank you very much. Before I get going, I just wanted to answer, Jose, you've had a question, but I haven't been able to type an answer because it said I could only say it. I don't know why. So you asked about, does Covidence have reliable AI features for rapid review? And if not, what should they use? So what Covidence does is it, after I think it's about 20 that you need to say yes or no to, and then it will start reorganizing how the next things to screen are listed, putting what it thinks you want them at the top and things with lesser likely that you're going to select at the bottom. For a while, they were trying out something that could sort out like with RCTs, but I don't think I think that went out of beta version. It's not there anymore. So probably if you're looking for a tool to do more sorting like up front without a lot of input from your team, might want to look into things like SysRev, or there's some other tools out there, AS Reviewer, that you might check out. And we've put onto the resources page lists of articles that have tried out some of these tools so that you can see more about them. Some of them are scoping reviews where they go over lots of different tools and processes, and some of them dive into one specific tool. And the other thing I would recommend if you want to learn more about this is watching the Cochrane webinars. And that gave my team a lot of confidence in saying to our clients, no, AI is not the best way to go for this yet. And we kind of knew that intuitively, but it was nice to have the confidence and the evidence behind it. But I still think it's important to understand how our clients are using AI and where AI is going so we can watch this interaction continue to happen, because we will see, and I have seen systematic reviews published completely using things like elicit. They're not well done, and it's easy to recognize the issues that they have and that they were using something like this and solely relying on it. So we're going to continue to see that, and so we've got to keep informed of it. But for the most part, it's easy to show our value and that they don't work out that great. Okay, so one of the questions that I got beforehand was about starting a service, especially for a solo librarian. So I thought I would go through some steps, and so if you can go to the next slide, of starting a service that would be for anybody, whether a solo librarian or not. And then along the way, I'll talk about some issues you might have as a solo librarian. So the first step is conducting a needs assessment, kind of figuring out what you want to do and what's already happening, and then starting to matching the needs of your client groups and what you can do. And so if you'll go to the next slide, if you were trying just a few tips, you might have already thought about doing these, and thinking about potential clients or people that are out there that might be champions for a service like this at your institution, looking at affiliations of the researchers and something like Dimensions or maybe even just Medline and looking for reviews. So who's already publishing at your institution? And then thinking about reaching out to the heads of research. So I know in some departments I've been able to go and talk with their head of research, and they were very interested in promoting writing reviews. So while they didn't have any review authors already, they wanted to promote that. And so it's easy to come into a departmental meeting and present on what we can do. Of course, there's all different ways that you could interact with them, surveys, one-on-one kind of thing. One thing that I like to do is if I go and give a presentation about a review tool or something like that, I'd like to include in there a Zoom survey like you're going to get at the end of this and ask them what further questions did they have, what services would they like, because we already know that they're interested. They wouldn't have shown up at that webinar if they weren't. And I also like to frame my webinars I don't like to say, oh, reviews 101 or something like that. I will say, let me tell you about all the tools or resources for conducting your reviews. And that's how I get more faculty to come than if it's like, oh, I'm just going to tell you about them, even though I am going to do that as well. Next slide. So if you're a solo librarian, you might think about your different clients and which ones you could help the most right now. And then as you're going through and building up your infrastructure or your potential for doing this, you might be able to move on to different groups. So these are how I kind of define potential clients of a systematic review service. I'd like to start with consumers. This is what most medical students would be. Most of the time, they're not going to be able to devote a year or more to a project. And they just need to understand what are reviews, how do you read them, how would you assess them, where do you find them, things like that. And so most librarians can as part of our jobs, offer that and work with them. And then you have your potential producers. So they're trying to do things like frame a question, determine the review, maybe build a search. So you're getting further in. And so this could be done in a class setting, a webinar, something like that. Maybe you wouldn't have the time to actually build the search and collaborate with them, but this would give them you could start them along the way with instruction. And then you have your producers. So depending on, your level and ability to have the time for doing this, you could offer more details, things like helping them select the databases, software, things like that. We also know that there's faculty who are maybe teaching reviews. Maybe they haven't conducted them themselves very much, or there's certain parts of it that they don't do themselves. So maybe coming in, finding out what those classes are and working with them. I have found that knowing ahead of time they plan on asking the students to do reviews, being a part of that is much more helpful than having to be reactionary to it. I'm sure many of you have had that experience. And then, like I said, we also have the administrators who may be pushing their faculty to conduct reviews. Maybe they're looking for help on funding or grants or things like that. And so by working with them, you might be able to offer some support, but maybe you're not able to do like the full collaborative part of it. Next slide. And so in thinking about, well, which clients do you have the most of, or are you interested in working with, then you can do, your 5 W's here, and an H. Thinking about, okay, what do you have the capacity to do right now, and thinking about those services. I think thinking about the why are you doing this can also be helpful. Part of our mission and vision is that we want any reviews coming out of A&M to be really well done. And so we're making sure that that's a part of our service, right? That we're teaching them and showing them what the standards are and trying to ensure that they're reported well and things like that. So the next slide, I think, gets a lot more into, okay, so if you're a team, you're going to have a lot more infrastructure than if you're on your own. And so it's thinking about, what do you have available? What amount of time do you have? What skills do you have right now that you could apply to the service? And then where do you want to go from there? And then Dani, she talked a lot about different project management tools that you can use. And thinking about maybe you set up so that everybody at your institution could have the Cochrane training tools, or maybe there's other training that you want to have them look at. So maybe you don't have the time to do it, but maybe you could have a list of videos and things that they could go and watch. So kind of outsourcing some of that. And then our next slide is talking about what do you need? So this is thinking about training for yourself. Do you need some more technology? Do you want to get links or subscriptions to some training tools that are out there? There's also a lot that's free for clients to look at as well. Also, if you're a solo librarian, I think one of the hardest parts is not having somebody to talk to. So you might consider reaching out to other solo librarians in your region that you could meet with on some kind of basis to talk about issues. I know I've been in contact with some solo librarians. They just have like a few questions. They need a sounding board for what's happening. And so thinking about building up your own little community and being able to talk. One of our rules in our team is if you get stuck, reach out right away. Let's talk it through. And sometimes it's when you're sitting by yourself, it's harder to think of a solution, or when you're in the middle of it. And so just having some sounding boards can be really helpful. And so I'm going to look over some of the questions you have, and we're open to more questions here as well. But the things we've talked about today is we went over the standards and best practices for integrating AI into workflows. And if you look at RAISE, the link that we put into the resources, which will be available along with the PDF of the slides. It has a link to RAISE, and it goes over, it's a pretty lengthy report and has a lot of details in there about the steps that I talked about overall. And then, my team has talked about different ways that they're using it, different examples where we've used it. But overall, we're still very skeptical of all of these. And so we're wanting, like I said, to keep ahead of what's happening. We want to keep ahead of our users and what they're using. Our library recently got a 1-year trial subscription to Syntheses, and so we're going to be looking at that. What is it good for? What are we going to tell our clients not to use it for? Things like that. So still a lot to learn, a lot of research to sort through, but still very skeptical of everything. So one of the questions in the Q&A right now is, any experience in conducting a bibliometric analysis using SiteSpace? I have not used that, so I can't really speak to that. And I'm going to switch over to chat and look at what's happening over there. If any of my team has seen a question that y'all want to respond to right now, feel free while I'm looking at this.
I do just want to jump in on your fellow librarian trying to start a service. My first library job, professional job, that was my situation. I was a baby librarian. I was brand new, both to librarianship and health sciences. And pretty much immediately people were asking me about systematic reviews. So I had to assess what I knew, which at that point was basically nothing. And I was very fortunate that my boss at the time just let me dive into MLA and just take whatever webinars I needed. So really, it was about educating myself and establishing a process. And actually, I saw somebody in the chat put Bay Area solo librarians assemble, and that's fantastic because I went to a regional conference. I went to MLIS and was able to connect with people there. And, after the meeting, kind of meet with them and have online meetings or emails or whatever to kind of help me along if I was stuck and didn't know what to do. So even if you're not part of a team, you can definitely kind of create a community for yourself. And I absolutely encourage that. I think that helped me quite a bit.
Thank you, Esmeralda. So I saw in the chat there was somebody saying, think about what you can contribute to an evidence synthesis project and what you can't at that point. And I think that's really important to know where your limitations are. And that's something that I talk about with the team as well. Knowing sometimes a client might be asking you for something like, can you help the screen, or can you help with looking at risk of bias across things, and we know we have to say no to some things. And so one thing I didn't list on that steps that I'm thinking about right now is listing out your policies very clearly. That can be really helpful to a solo librarian in not having to have so many conversations where you're saying no, but maybe have it, on your webpage listing the things that you're available to do then. And then as you can do more and listing more when you can. And so we have another question about integrating AI into evidence synthesis projects. Like, is it replicable and reproducible, things like that. So this is a really important thing because we know, like machine learning, it's much more stable, I guess is one way of saying it, reproducible, things like that. With LLMs, we know that they're not. You'll get different answers. And so a lot of the work that we've seen where there's like, oh, it's been very successful, has been in machine learning. One thing I would say just around reproducibility is even when we're talking about the searches themselves, because things change so quickly now with interfaces, sometimes even the search itself is not replicable later on. That happened to me about 15 years ago when a platform that our library used a lot went away and was absorbed by another platform, and then all of those searches had to be redone, that they were never going to be reproducible. And we've seen that with other interfaces, like EBSCO just underwent its big change. And we're kind of testing right now, are these going to be replicable? How do they compare with what we did before? So even things right now we think we can reproduce aren't quite as reproducible as we would like them to be. But I would say, with the LLMs, they're definitely, you get a different answer every time. That's not reproducible. So I think this is a realm to watch, and it's where groups like Cochrane are like, well, don't use it for that right now. A lot of what I've seen is don't use it for things where you have to make decisions that you don't know what the right answer is necessarily. So it's better to use it right now for summarizing things like that, not necessarily for deciding is this high or low risk of bias quite yet. We are seeing some tools coming out where it is doing that decision, and then it's giving the evidence for it, and then that way you have the human in the loop deciding is that true or not. But if you had a student who didn't understand, is that the right answer or not, that could be a huge problem. And that's why I'm saying it's a problem when it's decision making kinds of things. So I hope that answers your question there. Any of my other team members see a question that you want to answer?
Did you get the one in the Q&A? There's one.
Yes.
Okay.
I answered that one.
I'll click that one. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kyle. Did I hear you talking?
Yeah, it wasn't exactly a question. It was, I think Miranda had a comment earlier about showing administrators sections of this presentation to help them understand. I just wanted to quickly speak to like a very common misunderstanding I see from people who have surface level knowledge of reviews. And that's like, if you have a base level understanding of like the academic information landscape, a review itself can look a lot just like a textual processing issue. Like you have all the pieces there theoretically, but when you try and put it all together, it just doesn't work. And my conclusion is basically that a review is like, it's a conceptual linguistic problem whose parameters are paradoxically very hard to define through text alone. That human in the loop needs to be there constantly and iteratively. And without, having vetted all of these tools to the layman, it looks like, oh yeah, a review, I can totally automate that. But we're not there, and I don't think we're very close.
Thank you, Kyle. So we have a few questions. One was, do we decide like who we're going to work with? And so I know in some services, they choose to work with a group after they've developed their protocol. In our service, we help people to produce the protocol. And so, we work on like speculative kind of reviews where they're just trying to figure out what should we do, what kind of review to do. And so we take on teams at all different levels. But if you were a solo librarian, that may be something that you need to do is wait until they're a little bit further. And that's where giving those teams links to training videos or guides could be really helpful if you're not able to spend as much time with them. Let's see. These are all great questions.
I just wanted to address someone that said, I'm trying to scroll up to find it, where they're not able to do the project management part of the project. And we totally understand that. We're lucky in this group in that systematic reviews and evidence synthesis projects are what we do. We don't have those other, teaching responsibilities or clinical responsibilities, things like that. So we do realize that we're, fairly privileged in that area. And like Margaret said, sending people resources, letting folks know, like if you are taking on one of these projects, here's some options for you if you're looking to get things organized, just in case people don't know about how to organize things or the different steps of the project. Sometimes that is enough for people to go, oh, okay, cool. And then they can kind of go from there and then touch base with you whenever they come up with questions along the way. And it doesn't take that hands-on approach that we are able to offer a lot of our clients.
Yes, like Dani said, we're very fortunate that we have our focus. One thing that we do limit our reviews team to projects where it's not just like a student project. For those, we have worked with and trained our other librarians on how to address student review projects. So maybe it's just a class project. They may be calling it a systematic review. And so we've created competencies and guidelines to help our fellow librarians who get those questions, how to work with them. And then if they do develop more into a project that's going to be published, then they get into our queue and become an official review project. So we do have our limits as well. So Karen is asking about project management templates. Potentially, yes. Karen, if you could give us your email, I do have some templates I could potentially share out. So I'd be happy to do that. And I'm so excited. The one thing I love about doing this is all the resources and questions that I may not even be able to say here, but that you're putting into the chat. Know that afterwards, I love to go through and look at them. I always find out so much from all of your comments and questions. So thank you for sharing everything that you're putting out there.
Okay. Well, we're kind of getting toward the end of our 90 minutes here, so I don't know if there's anything else in the chat that you see, Margaret.
I just see one Q&A,
Okay.
if I could just speak to
Yeah,
this for a second.
absolutely. Sure,
And
sure.
so it is talking about what type of support do we get from library administrators to get buy-in from authors. And so, of course, this continues to be a problem even if you're known to be someone who's published many reviews. So it's just a conversation that we have, a policy on our LibGuide to show them up front what is expected, what we do, but it's still a conversation that we have with them, and we try to do that in that first meeting. And so we get a lot of support from our administrators and outside of the library as well to be listed as authors. But it is something that we put straight up front there, what our policy is, and we just talk it through. But I know it's not as easy in all places. But I'm going to let Margie do what she needs to do. And I just thank y'all for joining our fireside chat and for all of your questions.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And to answer the question that I just saw, yes, this is being recorded, and the recording will be processed and be available probably within the next 2 weeks. Once it's available, I will be sending out a link to the recording, which lives on the NNLM YouTube channel, as well as a link to the slides and the resource list. So again, I just want to thank Margaret and the team for joining us. We always enjoy having Margaret and her team with us because she provides such wonderful information that's always kind of cutting edge with what is going on with systematic review. So right now I'm going to kind of bring everything to a close, and we look forward to seeing you next month for Health Bytes with Region 3.
Thanks for watching. This video was produced by the network of the National Library of Medicine. Select the circular channel icon to subscribe to our channel, or select a video thumbnail to watch another video from the channel.